जनरञ्जन यशोदानन्दन व्रज जनरञ्जन यमुनतीरवनचारी यमुनतीरवनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी यशोदानन्दन व्रज जनरञ्जन यशोदानन्दन व्रज जनरञ्जन यमुनतीरवनचारी यमुनतीरवनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय ओम विश्वपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमद अभय चरणारविंद भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। गौर प्रेमानंदी। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। So we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 19. King Yayati achieves liberation. Text 25. So please repeat after me. Saha Tatra Nirmukta Samasta Sangaha Atma Anubhutya Vidhuta Trilingaha Pare Amale Brahmani Vasudeve Lebhe Gatim Bhagavatim Pratitaha Satatra Nirmukta Samasta Sangha Atmanubhutya Viduta Trilingaha Pare Male Brahmani Vasudeve Lebhe Gatim Bhagavatim Pratitaha Satatra Nirmukta Samasta Sangha Atmanubhutya Vidhuta Trilingaha Pare Male Brahmani Vasudeve Lebhe Gatim Bhagavatim Pratitaha Satatra Nirmukta Samasta Sangha Atmanubhutya Vidhuta Trilingaha Pare Male Brahmani Vasudeve लेभे गतिं भागवतीं प्रतीतः सतत्र निर्मुक्त समस्त संगः आत्मानुभूत्या विदुत त्रिलिंगः परे ब्रह्मणि वासुदेवे लेभे गतिं भागवतीं प्रतीतः सतत्र निर्मुक्त समस्त संगः आत्मानुभूत्या विदुत त्रिलिंगः परे मले ब्रह्मणि वासुदेवे लेभे गतिं भागवतीं प्रतीतः सतत्र निर्मुक्त समस्त संगः आत्मानुभूत्या विदुत त्रिलिंगः परे मले ब्रह्मणि वासुदेवे लेभे गतिं भागवतीं प्रतीतः। माताजी सतत्र निर्मुक्त समस्त संगा विदुत त्रिलिंगः परे मले ब्रह्मणि वासुदेवे लेभे गतिं भागवतीं प्रतीतः। सः महाराज ययाति तत्र upon doing this Nirmukta was immediately liberated from samasta sangaha, all contamination, atma anubhutya, simply by understanding his constitutional position. Vidhuta was cleansed of Trilingaha, the contamination caused by the three modes of material nature, Sattvaguna, Rajoguna and Tamoguna. Pare, onto the transcendence. Amale, without material contact. Brahmani, the Supreme Lord. Vasudeva, Krishna, the Absolute Truth. Bhagavan, Lebhe, achieved. Gatim, the destination. Bhagavatim, as an associate of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Pratitaha, famous. Translation purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder Acharya of ISKCON. Translation. Because King Yayati completely surrendered onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, he was freed from all contamination of the material modes of nature. Because of his self-realization, he was able to fix his mind upon the transcendence, Parabrahman, Vasudeva, and thus he ultimately achieved the position of an associate of the Lord. Purport. The word Vidhuta, meaning cleansed, is very significant. Everyone in this material world is contaminated. Karanam Gunasangasya. Because we are in a material condition, we are contaminated either by Sattvaguna, by Rajoguna, or by Tamoguna. Even if one becomes a qualified Brahmana in the mode of goodness, Sattvaguna, he is still materially contaminated. One must come to the platform of Shuddha Sattva transcending the Sattva Guna. Then one is Viduta Trilinga, cleansed of the contamination caused by the three modes of material nature. This is possible by the mercy of Krishna. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, Text 17, Shrinvatam Swakatha Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtanaha Hridyantastho Hyabhadrani Vidhunoti Suhritsatam. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma, super soul in everyone's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. A person trying to be perfectly Krishna conscious by hearing the words of Krishna from Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita certainly has all the dirty things cleansed from the core of his heart. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also says, Cheto Darpana Marjanam. The process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Supreme Lord washes away the dirty things accumulated in the core of the heart. As soon as one is freed from all the dirt of material contamination, as Maharaj Yayati was, one's original position as an associate of the Lord is revealed. This is called Swarupa Siddhi or personal perfection. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimade Bhakti Vikas Swamiti Namane. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimade Bhakti Vedanta Swamiti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prishthaya Pashtate Deshatarani. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Vedanta Shrivasadi Gaurava. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, translation, I'll read it again. Because King Yayati completely surrendered onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, he was freed from all contamination of the material modes of nature. Because of his self-realization, he was able to fix his mind upon the transcendence, Parabrahman, Vasudeva, and thus he ultimately achieved the position of an associate of the Lord. So this chapter is named as King Yayati achieves liberation. And the verses, the previous verses which are mentioned in this chapter leads us to this particular verse, which is King Yayati actually achieving liberation. So this is the process. So this is what has happened in his life. It's like a gist was given in the form of an analogy in this chapter. And then the conclusion is that King Yayati achieves liberation by this particular method, this particular process. Srila Prabhupada, in his purport, he writes that this word viduta means cleansed is very significant. But actually, if you see, of course, Prabhupada is pointing out to a particular word to focus on it here. But if we see, in fact, all the words which are, all the shabda which is used in this particular verse are quite significant. And throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, there are several instances and several ways in which these words have been explained and have been put forth so that we can understand them properly. So there is Nirmukta, Samasta Sangha. So there is lots of verses which have this word Nirmukta or Vimukta. So Mukta means getting free or getting liberated from something. And when it is supplanted or it's prefixed with Nirmukta or Vimukta, then it's very specifically concentrated upon or it's specific. Okay, so even if we see here, Srila Prabhupada writes, in the word to word, Nirmukta is translated as was immediately liberated from. So it's not only liberation, but he was immediately liberated. Okay, and the reason is because he was able to give up, or rather, we will see one by one, he was liberated from Samasta Sangaha. Now, I have some references here, okay, so where this word Nirmukta is being used widely and which are quite pertaining to the discussion that we have here with respect to King Yayati. So, the word Nirmukta is directly mentioned in, or it comes, Krishna speaks in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, in 28th verse, Yesham Tvantagatam Papam, Jananam Punya Karmanam, Te Dvandva Moha Nirmukta, bhajante mam dridavritaha. Okay, and this particular verse is pertaining to King Yati also, because if you see the translation of this verse, it says, Yesham tvanta gatam papam jananam punya karmanam. Those people whose sinful reactions have been eradicated, and those who have performed pious activities, right? Yesham tvanta gatam papam jananam punya karmanam. And we have also been discussing that Yayati is a very pious king. He has performed lots of sacrifices. He was the emperor of the world. And Mahabharata specifically mentions Yayati as an extremely pious person. So he is able to come out of this dvandva. Te dvandva moha nirmukta. So he was able to come out of this dvandva. And we speak about dvandva, then again the previous verse, 7:27 says, Ichha dvesha samuthena dvandva mohena bharata sarva bhutani sammoha sarge yanti parantapa. So Ichha and Moha, this classic definition of this dvandva, this desire and hate. And Srila Prabhupada also explains at many places different types of dvandva, happiness, distress, heat, cold, then man, woman. So these different dvandvas in which a living entity is bewildered. So Maharaj Yayati was able to come out of that, okay, because he was a pious person. Te dvandva moha nirmukta bhajante mam dritavritaha. So this bhajante mam dritavritaha is what is mentioned here. Pare male brahmani vasudeve lebhe gatim bhagavatim pratitaha. So he rendered devotional service onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Right? In the translation also is mentioned, because King Yayati completely surrendered onto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he was freed from all contamination of the material modes of nature. So this particular verse is pertaining to this discussion we have in our hand. And this Ichha Dvesha Samuthena in the purport, Srila Prabhupada gives a list of the dualities that we experience within this material world. He says there are dualities of honor and dishonor, where we feel that we are honored and we are dishonored. But then this is pertaining to our body, either gross body or subtle body. We feel honor or dishonor in the subtle mind, right? We act as a spirit soul, the spirit soul is beyond this honor and dishonor. Then he speaks about misery and happiness, which is experienced again in the mind or through the body. Then woman and man, distinguishing between two different bodies. This is also duality. Good and bad. Right? So as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, whatever is there, what we think as good or bad with this material world is just a Brahma. It's just an illusion. And pleasure and pain, etc. Thinking, this is my wife, this is my house, I am the master of this house, I am husband of this wife. These are the dualities of delusion. Okay, so these are the dualities of delusion. And this delusion is born from Sangha, from association with this material world. Right? This verse says, Sa tatra nirmukta samasta sangha. Now, this verse from Bhagavad Gita again, chapter 15, text 5. Nirmana moha jita sangha dosha adhyatma nitya vinivritta kamaha dvandvair vimuktaha sukha dukkha samgir gacchante mudha padam avyayam tat. Now this verse is also very, very similar to what we are discussing now. So this is nirmana moha. So nirmana, giving out all the pride that one may have. Nirmana moha, giving up the illusion. Nirmana moha. Jita sangha dosha. So sangha dosha, there is a dosha, there is a fault of association within this material world. And a person must give that up. Jita means winning over this Jita Sangha dosha, the dosha that we have of association with this material world. One should conquer it, one should come over it, one should win it up. This Jita Sangha dosha, Adhyatma Nitya. One's consciousness should always be focused on the Adhyatma, on the spiritual, eternally. Adhyatma Nitya, Vinivritta Kamaha, and he should give up all lusty desires. So when one obtains that, which means Nirmukta Samasta Sangha, Atmana Bhutya Viduta Trilingaha. Okay, it's very similar to that particular verse. Nirmana moha jita sangha dosha adhyatma nitya vinivritta kamaha. Dvandvair vimuktaha sukha dukkha samgir. Dvandvair vimuktaha. He becomes liberated from these dvanda, from the duality that we discussed now. He becomes liberated from that. Dvandvair vimuktaha sukha dukkha samgir. And this dvanda is defined with sukha and dukkha. So now if we just analyze it a little bit, no, in this material world, we have only these two things, if we categorize it that way. There is either happiness and there is distress. And that's it. So everything that we do, or all the varieties that we see, unlimited, infinite amount of varieties we see in the material world, we are either experiencing happiness or we are experiencing distress. So it can be characterized only into these two. Either we are happy about some situation or distressed about some situation. And again, this happiness and distress is dvandva, means ultimately it's misery in this material world, but the so-called happiness also is a misery only because it pertains only to the body, it's temporary. So dvandvair vimukta sukha dukkha samge. This dvandvair is identified with sukha and dukkha, and gacchante amudha padam avyayam tat. So that person who has given up all this jita sangha dosha, who has conquered this sangha dosha, then he goes to the topmost destination. Gacchante mudha. He's intelligent person. He's not a mudha. He's amudha. So gacchante mudha padam avyayam tat. So similarly, Yayati here, he is nirmukta samasta sangha. He has given up all his association, all the bad association. He's atmanubhutya viduta trilingaha. And he has conquered the three modes of material nature by his self-realization. Pare male brahmani vasudeve lebhe gatim. And he has achieved the position of an associate of the Lord. Lebhe gatim bhagavatim pratitaha, which is a very famous position. So very similar. This particular verse is actually applicable to Maharaj Yayati. And if you see here, this nirmukta and samasta sangha is mentioned. So sangha dosha we discussed. And if you see from this particular chapter, or rather the whole instance or the whole historical narration of Maharaj Yayati, the focus has been on women. Okay, right from the start. You see, Shukracharya's daughter is Devyani, and Devyani's friend is Sharmishtha. And now there is a conflict between Sharmishtha and Devyani. So then Devyani she comes out as the superior person in this particular thing. And then she, or rather, before she falls down into the well, before that, then Yayati comes, he saves Devyani. Then Devyani wants to take revenge against Sharmishtha. So then Devyani takes the revenge against Sharmishtha. Then she gets married to Yayati. And then they enjoy life for time. Then Devyani gets pregnant. She has children. And then Sharmishtha also wants to marry Yayati. So she also has children. And again, Devyani is not very happy with this particular situation. So she runs to Shukracharya's house. Then Yayati runs after Devyani. And then Shukracharya curses Yayati. And then after that, then seeing that Devyani's enjoyment will also be hampered, he gives him a toad or a benediction that if you can exchange your old age with somebody else, then it is possible. Then Yayati enjoys with Devyani. So we see the whole instance, Devyani is always in the focus. The woman is in the focus. And ultimately, Shukdev Goswami leads to the conclusion that this Sangha or this association with the woman was not a very happy instance for Yayati. Because at multiple places he had to go through tribulations. And after going through all these tribulations also, after enjoying with her for thousands of years, still he was not satisfied. Right? After all these things, all the women is the focus. And so this Samasta Sangha, when it's mentioned, it's related to, or we can relate it to this verse from Bhagavatam. This pumsasthriya mituni bhavametam tayor hidaya granthi ahu atho griha kshetra sutapta vittair janasya mohoyam aham mameti. So this focus is on the woman, and Yayati is associating with this woman, Devyani. And by that, then he's enjoying his life. Pumsasthriya mituni bhava etam tayor hridaya granthi mahu. Tayor mito hridaya granthi mahu. So a knot is formed in his heart because of his association with a woman. And then atho griha kshetra sutta apta. We have discussed this verse several times in Bhagavatam classes. So I'll not get into the details because we want to discuss something else also. So then these expansions are there, right? So there's a sangha with women, and samasta sangha includes all these things: griha, kshetra, sutta, apta, vittair. And then it becomes the cause of bewilderment. Janasya mohoyam aham, correct? Janasya mohoyam aham mameti. So he gets into that kind of consciousness. So, but because Yayati was a pious person, and he was able to overcome this Hridaya Granthi, right? And he could understand that what the association which he had with this woman, Devyani, is not actually beneficial for him. And it has led him to a position where he's totally entangled and bound by this material moods, by this association of these material moods. There's one more thing which is mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam, and Srila Prabhupada also writes at multiple places that if one has to come out of this, or one has to get himself liberated, come out of this entanglement, come out of this bondage, then one must have association with pure devotees. The specific verse, this Mahat Sevam Dwaram Ahar Vimuktes Tamo Dwaram Yoshitam Sangi Sangam Mahantaste Samachitta Prashanta Vimanyabha Suhrda Sadhavuye. This particular verse says, Mahat Sevam Dwaram Ahar Vimukte. Right? This word Vimukte is there. If you want to attain liberation, one must render service at the lotus feet of the Mahatmas or the pure devotees of the Lord. Correct? But if you see, in this instance of Bhagavatam, we do not directly read any shloka or any instance where King Yayati had association with a pure devotee of the Lord. Right? But if you see from a broader perspective, the way the culture was before, these kings were always, see, when we speak about Yayati, Yayati was the emperor of the whole world. He was not just a king of a particular area, but he was the king of kings. He was an emperor of the whole world. So there are subordinate kings also under him. And when there is an emperor, then he is supposed to, and when we speak of Yayati as a pious person, then he is inviting Brahmanas for sacrifices. He is giving charity to the Brahmanas, correct? And he is performing his religious duties, his Varna duties very nicely. And in course of activities, it is understood that at that time, Narad Muni would have visited him. Okay, and actually, this comes in Mahabharata that Yayati had discussions with Narad Muni, and he also had discussions with Garuda, who is also a pure devotee of the Lord. So he had that association. Okay, and that association could not manifest itself fully because he was engaged in these sensual activities with his wife, Devyani, and then Sharmishtha. But just like we see, a little bit of association, Lava Matra Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Siddhi Hoy, that has happened here. So because Yayati had association with these pure devotees, therefore he was able to come to his senses that I have tried to enjoy this material world for these many years, following the religious principles, but no, it has not worked out. It has not worked out. I have only entangled myself. And he could come to the understanding of, or he could self-realize, right? This verse says, Atmanubhutya. Srila Prabhupada translates as simply by understanding his constitutional position. So just by following one's Varna and Ashrama duties, one cannot come to this particular point unless he has heard of these topics from a pure devotee of the Lord. Or at least, if not pure devotee, even an impersonal Brahmavadi, he should have heard these topics. That this entanglement in this material world, or rather enjoyment in this material world, is actually an entanglement. So because he has heard of it, and that is there in his mind, he was able to come to this understanding that he has to give this up. He has to give up the association of women. And one more thing is, this verse also specifically mentions that Yayati did not have association with those Brahmanas who are of impersonalistic tendencies. Because the verse specifically says, Pare Male Brahmani Vasudeve. He had association with those who are devotees of the Lord. And because he had that association, he could come to his senses. And this we can also, there are instances in Bhagavatam itself when Ajamila, he was a devotee of the Lord. He chanted the Lord's names. But he was diverted when he saw a prostitute engaged in illicit sexual activities with somebody in the forest. And then he got completely corrupted. But at the end, by the mercy of the Lord, because he has rendered some devotional service, he has given oral reception to the words of sadhus. He was a devotee of the Lord. Then the Lord is merciful. The Lord became merciful to him. And at the end of his life, he chanted the name of Narayana, Lord Narayana, and then he was saved that way. So this is what we understand. So from Yayati's life's point of view, he also served the devotees. He also had association with the devotees, and he learned, he gave oral reception to all these points. And that is how he was able to understand that this enjoyment that he tried to experience throughout did not work, and it did not give him the happiness or the ecstasy that he expected. And by the Lord's mercy, he was able to understand. The Lord as Paramatma in the heart revealed that you have tried to enjoy. Now this revelation has been given to him by the Lord, right? In 10th chapter also Krishna says that one who is engaged in devotional service to him, he lights from within, he gives him transcendental knowledge. So Yayati, being a pious person, now he was given the opportunity to enjoy in this material world the highest pleasure, so-called highest pleasure. And after he became dissatisfied, then immediately he was given this transcendental knowledge by the super soul, by Paramatma, that this is all is nonsense. One cannot attain any happiness by association within this material world. One has to render devotional service unto the Lord. That's why we see here, in the last few verses, like within the last 5-6 verses, Yayati understood that what has happened is not proper, and he was able to give up this association immediately, right? Nirmukta samasta sangha. Immediately, he was immediately liberated from all contamination. And how? By Atma Anubhutya, simply by understanding his constitutional position. So unless he has heard from devotees, how is it possible for him to understand his constitutional position? So he had association. And then now, after, see, if we can just hypothesize that if the desire is there within the heart of Yayati to enjoy this material world, and actually this is what happened, no? He wanted to enjoy this material world. He was a pious person, and the devotees used to come and give him instructions. But because the seed of desire was there in the heart, he could not implement, or he could not attain the stage of Atma Anubhutya. He could not attain the state of self-realization. But when he finished off, or he became disgusted after so-called enjoyment with his wife for thousands of years, then the time was ripe. It's like the fruit is ripe for taking out and offering. It's like that. So the time was ripe for him to understand, to render devotional service unto the Lord. And being a pious person, having listened, having heard, having given oral reception to the devotees, he could immediately come to the understanding that he has to render devotional service unto the Lord. So Atma Anubhutya happened. And then this word is also mentioned, that Viduta Trilingaha. And Srila Prabhupada writes that Viduta means cleansed, which is very significant here. And he says everyone in this material world is contaminated. Karanam Guna Sangasya. Now this verse comes in Bhagavad Gita, that Purusha Prakritosti Bhunkte Prakriti Jargunan Karanam Guna Sangasya Sadasad Yoni Janmasu. So this is Purusha Prakriti Sthohi. Purusha refers to the living entity. Okay. So this actually, we are speaking about this Trilingaha. Trilingaha is association with these three modes of material nature. And this particular verse, which Srila Prabhupada refers here, speaks about that. It says, Purushaha Prakriti Sthohi. The Purusha means the enjoyer. The Supreme Lord is the enjoyer. But when the living entity enters into this material world, he thinks of himself as the enjoyer. So he is called as Purusha with this material world. Although the Parama Purusha is Bhagavan Krishna himself, but within this material world, in the contaminated consciousness, the living entity is also addressed as Purusha, the Shastra. So Purusha, Prakriti Sthohi. Now this Prakriti is this material nature. And this material nature is made up of these three modes. So Purusha, Prakriti Sthohi, the Purusha, the living entity who wants to enjoy this material world, he situates himself in this material nature, which is made up of these three modes. Purusha, Prakriti Sthohi. Bhunkte Prakriti Jan Gunan. And Bhunkte means he enjoys. He tries to enjoy Prakriti Jan Gunan, all the objects of sense gratification which are made up of these three modes of material nature. Bhunkte Prakriti Jan Gunan. With these three modes, whatever, actually the whole material world is made up of three modes, so he tries to enjoy. And Karanam Guna Sangasya. And his bondage is because this guna sangha, his association with these three modes. So again, if you see here, his samasta sangha is mentioned and viduta trilingaha. So these are similar. So karanam guna sangasya, and because of this association, one undergoes repeated birth and death. Karanam guna sangasya, sad asad yoni janmasu. Okay, so sad and asad means either in a higher form of life or in a lower form of life, he keeps on taking birth and then ultimately he dies also. So this is the contamination. The living entity is pure. The living entity has nothing to do with these three modes of material nature. But because it comes in association with it for the sake of enjoyment, bhungte, this purusha and bhungte, purusha, the desire to enjoy, to become the lord in this material world, to enjoy varieties of this material world and to keep oneself in the center. It gives a sense of oneself being the enjoyer. So bhungte prakriti jargunan. And because of that, then he is completely bewildered. Right? So Srila Prabhupada further writes, this is contamination. Because we are in a material condition, we are contaminated either by sattva guna, by rajoguna, or by tamoguna. Even if one becomes a qualified brahmana in the mode of goodness, sattva guna, he is still materially contaminated. Right? So this contamination is in the three modes, all the three modes. And Srila Prabhupada at several places, he writes that those who are the karmis, who are trying to enjoy this material world, they are predominantly in the mode of passion and in the mode of ignorance, which means rajoguna and tamoguna. And one who's trying to transcend these fruitive activities, he is in sattva guna. So he says that those who are trying to remove or mitigate the miseries of this material world, which comes because of association with the objects in this material world, those who want to mitigate it, they are situated in sattva guna. And he says that the impersonalists who are trying to come out or who are trying to mitigate the suffering, they are actually in sattva guna only. They are not in shuddha sattva. Okay, they are actually in sattva guna, they are not in shuddha sattva, which means the impersonalists or the mayavadis, although they have very regulated life, they try to come out of this material world by their so-called processes, but still they can at the max come only to sattva guna. They cannot transcend it. That's why mayavadis don't get liberated. And because their sattva guna is also tinged with an intense or a sufficient amount of false ego, therefore they fall down. So it's a mixture of sattva guna and tamoguna, we can say. So therefore they don't go out of this material world. So this is contamination. And it's mentioned viduta trilingaha. Viduta means yayati was cleansed from all this contamination. So not only he understood that this enjoyment in this material world is bogus, but he also did not get affected by impersonalism. Right? When it says viduta trilingaha, he did not get affected by anything which is impersonal. And this is very clearly mentioned in the third line, pare male brahmani vasudeve. And because he was not contaminated by the impersonalism, he could render devotional service. He could surrender onto the Supreme Lord. Right? And it's very clear. When it says pare, it's transcendental. Now it can be impersonal Brahman also, and it can be the Supreme Lord's abode also. Amale also can refer to the impersonal Brahman. Right? Brahmani, the spiritual reality can also be impersonal, or it can refer to Bhagavan. So this word Vasudeva very clearly mentions that what Yayati did is to render devotional service onto the Lord. So it's para. This position of Vasudeva is para. It's transcendental, it's amala, it's not contaminated, and it is the supreme reality. It's Brahmani. So pare male Brahmani Vasudeva. And Srila Prabhupada at several places also explains about this Vasudeva Sattva. Okay, there are three modes, Sattva Guna, Rajoguna and Tamoguna, and there is Shuddha Sattva. And Shuddha Sattva platform is also called as Vasudeva Sattva. Okay, so there is one reference I have here. So this is from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 30, purport. Srila Prabhupada writes, and this again, it's very relatable to what Maharaj Yayati is experiencing here. Pure self-realization, as we have several times discussed, is the pure consciousness of admitting oneself to be the eternal servitor of the Lord. Okay, as Maharaj Yayati did here. Thus, one is reinstated in his original position of transcendental loving service to the Lord, as will be clearly explained in the following verses. This stage of rendering transcendental loving service to the Lord without any hopes of emolument from the Lord. Emolument means without any benefits from the Lord or any other way can be attained when the material senses are purified and the original pure state of the senses is revived. Right? So it can be attained when the material senses are purified, means viduta trilingaha. The senses are contaminated when they come in association with the three modes. And these senses, when they are purified, this is the state of viduta trilingaha, when the senses are purified, are cleansed from this association. And the pure state of the senses is revived. Atmanubhutya. It is suggested herein that the process of purifying the senses is by the yogic way, namely, the gross senses are merged into the mode of ignorance, and the subtle senses are merged into the mode of passion. The mind belongs to the mode of goodness, and therefore is called Devamaya, or godly. Perfect purification of the mind is made possible when one is fixed in the conviction of being the eternal servitor of the Lord. Therefore, simple attainment of goodness is also a material mode. One has to surpass this stage of material goodness and reach the point of purified goodness or Vasudeva Sattva. This Vasudeva Sattva helps one to enter into the kingdom of God. And it's also mentioned, another reference is from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, text 27. Chapter 27, text 13, purport. Srila Prabhupada writes, the conditioned soul thinks I am this body, but a liberated soul thinks I am not this body, I am spirit soul. This I am is called ego or identification of the self. I am this body or everything in relationship to the body is mine is called false ego. But when one is self-realized and thinks that he is an eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord, that identification is real ego. One conception is in the darkness of the threefold qualities of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. And the other is in the pure state of goodness called Shuddha Sattva or Vasudeva. Which means here, Atmanubhutya Viduta Trilingaha. By his self-realization, by understanding his constitutional position, he could cleanse himself from this Trilingaha, from these three modes of material nature. And he could concentrate himself on, or he could invest his consciousness in the Supreme Lord. And this stage is called as the liberated stage, Nirmukta. Nirmukta Samasta Sangha, Atmanubhutya Viduta Trilingaha, Paremale Brahmani Vasudeve. So one becomes actually liberated when one invests his consciousness on the Supreme Lord. And that state is called as Vishuddha Sattva or Vasudeva Sattva. Srila Prabhupada continues, he says, the identification of oneself with one's material possessions in the conditioned stage must be purified, and one must identify himself in relationship with the Supreme Lord. In the conditioned state, one accepts everything as an object of sense gratification, and in the liberated state, one accepts everything for the service of the Supreme Lord. Krishna consciousness, devotional service, is the actual liberated stage of a living entity. Otherwise, both accepting and rejecting on the material platform or in voidness or impersonalism are imperfect conditions for the pure soul. So this dvandva, accepting and rejecting on the material platform, is also an imperfect condition of the spirit soul. Right? So then by this he attained Lebhe Gatim Bhagavatim Pratitaha. And another way of looking at this verse is the sequence in which Maharaj Yayati achieved the supreme destination. From each line, if you see, is Sa Tatra Nirmukta Samasta Sangha. So what he first did was he gave up all kinds of material association. Nirmukta Samasta Sangha. Right? So we can take guidance from what actually happened with Maharaj Yayati. What we should do is we should give up all kinds of material association. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very particular in this, in Chaitanya Charitamrita. in Madhya Leela, when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is speaking about the principles of pure devotional service, he says that the qualification of a devotee or the acharan or the behavior of a devotee is that he gives up the bad association. Asat sangatyag e Vaishnava achar. The association, or one who wants to identify himself as a devotee of the Lord, or one who is engaged, or one who wants to engage in devotional service of the Lord, the first thing that he should do, or his behavior should be that he should give up the association of non-devotees. Okay, so that is very important. So we, from our practical life, when we see that we have to associate or we come in contact with several non-devotees, but then if we think that by associating with him, I will not be contaminated, then it's an illusion. Okay, it is a big illusion. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Asat Sangatyag, E Vaishnava Achar, then we must give up the association of non-devotees, or association of those who are associates of non-devotees. Okay, so this is very important. So first thing that one should do is Nirmukta Samasta Sangha, give up the association of non-devotees. And that way, when one performs devotional service, Atmanubhutya becomes easier. We might have experienced in our life that we take up devotional service, we perform the activities of devotional service, but because of some samskaras or previous contamination, we are not able to give up some material things, right? Some desire for material. It can be gross or it can be subtle. Okay, it can be either way. And because of that, our advancement or our taste, our relish of Krishna consciousness is hampered. Okay, we do not feel taste. We feel frustrated, actually. We understand that we are not supposed to engage ourselves in any kind of material activity, but then because of our samskaras, the mind drives us towards that kind of activity and we are not able to control ourselves. We engage in sense gratification, then there is certain amount of frustration that we know we are not supposed to do this, but then we are doing this because we are not able to control ourselves. We would have experienced this in our life, or actually I have experienced this. So, Atmanubhutya Viduta Trilingaha. So this Atmanubhutya, it happens when one gives up this association. And Srila Prabhupada, in one of his purports, he writes that one has to voluntarily give it up. So it's not that it will automatically happen. Okay, one has to make a determined effort to give up his material desires, to give up the association of the three modes of material nature. So when we speak about non-devotees, why we have to give up the association of non-devotees? Because they are engaged in the activities of the three modes. So philosophically speaking, what we are supposed to do is give up the association of the three modes and anything related to that. So this association can be the association of non-devotees, and nowadays the association is very easy to achieve. We have all these phones, computers, laptops, media is there, videos are there. All our previous samskaras which we want to get away from, these can be very easily satisfied or can be easily engaged in this modern world. It's unfortunate, but that's how it is. But one has to make a voluntary effort. We have to voluntarily make an effort. It's not that automatically it will happen. So we have to push ourselves. Okay, so that is required. And when we push ourselves, we become serious, then obviously Krishna will also help. That's there. But then our endeavor should be there. And when that is there, when our endeavor is there, we voluntarily restrain our senses from engaging in sense gratification, then the Atmanubhutya, or the experience of ourselves, our constitutional position as an eternal servitor of the Lord, it reveals or it's illuminated within the heart. And that is where the experience of Krishna consciousness or the bliss of Krishna consciousness is experienced. We are engaged in devotional service now, but then we are also somehow related or somehow entangling ourselves in this material nature. We give up this Asat Sangha or Samasta Sangha, Nirmukta Samasta Sangha, then Atmanubhutya comes up. And when Atmanubhutya comes, then it helps further in removing ourselves or detaching ourselves from this Trilingaha, Viduta Trilingaha. We come out of that. So it's a sequence. We give up Samasta Sangha, then we realize ourselves, and then we further detach ourselves. Then Pare Male Brahmani Vasudeve. And in that position, when one has achieved this Atmanubhutya, then he can render devotional service unto the Lord. Right? Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma, Nashochadina Kankshati, Sama Sarvesha Bhuteshu, Mad Bhaktim Labate Param. So when one attains to this Atmanubhutya or Brahma Bhuta platform, then he can render devotional service unto the Lord. He can surrender fully himself. He can surrender himself fully to the Lord. So that is Pare Male Brahmani Vasudeve. And when one surrenders fully or completely onto the Lord, then Lebhe Gatim Bhagavatim Pratitaha. One attains the supreme destination as an associate of the Lord. So there's a very nice sequence which comes in this verse. So this is, so it's good for us to understand and try to implement in our life. Okay, so that is there. So finally, just one, this is a translation from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 19, text 20 to 24. So this translation is very instructive for us, so I'll just read it and then stop. So it says, firm faith, this is Lord Krishna speaking, okay, as to what a devotee should do to attain the supreme destination. It's very inspiring. Firm faith in the blissful narration of my pastimes. So actually he's giving a list what all a devotee should do to attain the supreme destination or the purpose of one's life. Firm faith in the blissful narration of my pastimes. So one should have firm faith in the narrations of the Lord's pastimes. Constant chanting of my glories. One should constantly chant the glories of the Lord. Unwavering attachment to ceremonial worship of me, which means deity worship. So one should have unwavering attachment. One should be attached to deity worship. For us, it's Arti, Kirtan. One should be attached to that. Praising me through beautiful hymns. One should praise the Lord through hymns. Great respect for my devotional service. So we should not take devotional service very lightly. We should have great respect for devotional service to the Lord. We are associating. Devotional service means we are associating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And when we say Supreme Personality of Godhead, it's that Supreme Person. We are associating with Him directly just by chanting His name, by engaging in the 9 process of devotional service. So one should have great respect for His devotional service, offering obeisances with the entire body, performing first-class worship of my devotees. Right? And Prabhupada, he says this, that Mad Bhakta Puja Bhyadika. If you have heard, or rather, you would have heard in Prabhupada's many lectures, he says this, Mad Bhakta Puja Bhyadika, which means that rather than worship of me, the worship of my devotees is very pleasing to me. Prabhupada says, many of his conversations says this. So this is what it is, that one should perform first-class worship of my devotees. Consciousness of me in all living entities. So one should understand that the living entities are not independent. The living entities are part and parcel of the Lord. So they are actually in one. In one sense, they are one with the Lord. Offering of ordinary bodily activities in my devotional service. So even offering of our bodily activities in devotional service is also very pleasing to the Lord. Giving up wealth for my devotional service. Renouncing material sense gratification and happiness. So one should renounce material sense gratification and renounce happiness also. Okay, which is material happiness. So one should not run after that. One should not run after sense gratification. One should renounce material sense gratification and happiness. And performing all desirable activities such as charity, sacrifice, chanting, vows and austerities with the purpose of achieving me. So charity should be done for the purpose of achieving the Lord. Sacrifices should be done for purpose of achieving Him. Chanting should be for that particular purpose. It should not be for our material comfort or for mitigating material miseries. Normally when one takes up devotional service, his chanting is also tinged with removing all the miseries that he's experiencing with this material world. So that should not be the goal of chanting. That should not be the consciousness. One's vows and austerities should be performed with the purpose of achieving the Supreme Lord. And he says, Krishna says, after listing all this, these constitute genuine religious principles by which those human beings who have actually surrendered themselves to me automatically develop love for me. What other purpose or goal could remain for my devotees? Right? There's no other purpose or goal for devotees. This is what they are supposed to do. Okay, so this is what Maharaj Yayati did, and he could ultimately, this is what mentioned right here, right? In the translation it says, because of his self-realization, he was able to fix his mind upon the transcendence, Parabrahman, Vasudeva, and consequently, thus he ultimately achieved the position of an associate of the Lord, which means he could develop pure love for Krishna. Okay, so these are some of the things which I thought about this verse. If you have any questions, comments, then we can discuss that. Yes, Prabhu. Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, Prabhu.
So the absolute truth. Hello, Hare Krishna. Yeah,
The
so the
absolute
absolute
truth?
truth can be realized as Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan,
Yes.
out of which Bhagavan is the complete truth, and the
Yes.
other two are just aspects of him.
That is?
Uh, the other two are just aspects of Bhagavan, and
Yes.
Bhagavan is the complete truth.
Yes.
But still, to realize either one of them, how can it be possible to still be on the platform associating with Sattva-guna?
How can it be possible?
No, you had said that the impersonalists, for example,
Yes.
they are still uh, associating with Sattva-guna.
Yes.
But to realize any of the aspects of the
Yes.
absolute truth,
Yes.
how can one be associating with any
Yes.
guna? Right?
Okay, so the question is the absolute truth has these three aspects Bhagavan, Paramatma, and Brahman. And when I was speaking, I mentioned that this impersonalists, or I mentioned Mayavadis, they are still in Sattva-guna, or they are trying to be in Sattva-guna by following their various rules and regulations, but they also are tinged with Tamoguna also. So Mayavadis don't realize Brahman, okay, because they are offenders to the Lord. They are still materially contaminated. So Mayavadis don't realize Brahman. There are these two kinds of, there are two, there's a Mayavadi and there's Brahmavadi. So these Brahmavadis, they see everything as Brahman, everything as spirit. Okay, and they do not differentiate between Bhagavan being, see, okay, I'll just tell. The problem with Mayavadis is they think the form of the Lord is material. Okay, that is their problem. The form of the Lord is material. So they do not understand what is spiritual. Okay, what is the Supreme Spirit, they do not understand. And because of this lack of understanding, they do not transcend the this material nature. Okay, they remain within this material realm. But this Brahmavadis, they do not differentiate between these three, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. For them, the Supreme Lord is also transcendental, Brahman is also transcendental, Paramatma is also transcendental feature of the Lord. So they can attain to the position of Brahma Jyoti. Okay, but not the Mayavadis. Mayavadis don't go to Brahma Jyoti. Right, so yeah, so that's what it is.
The point was that the Mayavadis are in Sattva-guna.
Yes, Mayavadis, by their activities. See, if you see their lifestyle is very regulated. They also get up early in the morning. They also have their sadhana. They also take bath 3 times a day. So that, they situate themselves in Sattva-guna. But their understanding is completely different. Their thought process, or you can see the subtle body is in Tamoguna, we can say. It's in Sattva-guna such that their activities are regulated that way, but their understanding of the spirit or trying to become one with the Lord is actually, it's worse than being situated in hell. Correct? So that's total tamoguna, that understanding is. So that way they do not get liberated. They do not go to Brahmajyoti. Yes. Yes.
That Mayavadi concept is basically a last snare of Maya.
Yes, Mayavadi is the last snare of Maya. One thinks one can get liberated from this material world, but actually it's the last snare of Maya. So last snare of Maya means she wants to keep you here. So she keeps the Mayavadi with them nicely. She does not allow them to
More
get
worse
liberated.
than usual tamogun.
Yes.
See, they think that they're doing, actually they think they're doing in sattvagun.
Yes.
But actually they're in the worst of a tamogun.
Yes. 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 Thank you. Yes. Okay. Yes. Now we see in there are two famous personalities. There is this Kumaras and Shukdev Goswami. They are on the Brahman platform. And when they heard the pastimes of the Lord, they were totally attracted. The Kumaras were attracted to the tulsi which was offered to the lotus feet of the Lord by that fragrance. And Shukdev Goswami, when he heard the narration of Bhagavatam from the disciples of Vyasadeva, he was attracted to the pure devotional service of the Lord. So that's why it's not Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma. One who is situated properly in Brahma Bhuta, he ultimately comes. Who? Devotional service of the Lord. Yes, yes.
It was very nice. Every word you took and then every line related with Gita and then the specific verse in the Bhagavatam, that was really so inspiring. And another word that when you were discussing about Vasudeva, another word just reminded me from the fourth canto of the Bhagavatam, from the Daksha section, Shiva's prayers, that where the definition for Vasudeva and also the Shuddha Sattva, being Srila Prabhupada often quotes this how does it go? Vishuddham Vasudeva Shabditam. How does it go?
Vasudeva Shabdam.
Sattvam Vishuddham Vasudeva Shabditam.
Sattvam Vishuddham Vasudeva
That reminded me of that.
Yes.
Well, I have so many other points also, but there is no time. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Many other nice points are there. Since of lack of time, I will just stop here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.